Hello friends, myself Vijay Kumar Gupta and I am your educator in physiology. Today we will be learning one of the very interesting topic in physiology, and that is transport across membrane. So why is the topic so important? There are a few reasons for this. First of all, it forms the basis of all the systems in physiology, because there are going to be the movement of ions and molecules across the membrane, which will help you to understand the systemic physiology, applied physiology, as well as integrated physiology. The transport across membrane also helps us to understand what are the substances which are transported inside the membrane from outside to inside, or what are the substances which are transported from inside to outside. So it is the movement of molecules and ions across the cell membrane which we are going to study in today's session. Whenever I begin with this session of transport across membrane, I keep in mind two things. First, what is the structure of cell membrane that allows the movement of the ions, and how does it help or prevent the movement of the ions and the molecules? Second, what are the properties of ions and molecules which are required for them to move across the membrane? And the third, how this movement is governed, whether its movement is passive, that it does not require any sort of energy, or whether this movement is active, it requires energy in terms of ATP or in terms of kinetics or potential energies. So keeping these few questions in mind, let us begin with our today's topic, that is transport across membrane. To give an idea, the transport across membrane, just to have where the molecules are moving. Remember, we have a cell with a nucleus in it, and we have the extracellular fluid compartment. The environment which is just outside the cell is encompassing a fluid which is called as extracellular fluid, and the fluid within the cell is called as intracellular fluid. So we have two compartments here. One is ECF and the other one is ICF, that is extracellular fluid which is outside the cell, and the intracellular fluid which is inside the cell. The substance, they move either from ECF to ICF, or they move from ICF to ECF. This movement of the ions or molecules is known as transport across membrane. There are many things to study under this topic. Let us begin with what this transport means in reality. Okay, so to begin with, first of all, what is a cell membrane and what it comprises of? How does the cell membrane govern the movement of the ions? Remember, the life itself has originated under water. So the cell membrane has to prepare itself for the molecules or the ions which are dissolved in water. Remember, yes, I know this sounds quite confusing. But to understand the structure of the cell membrane, we'll go back to the evolution. Yes, the cell membrane is a barrier for the cell to the outside world. Now, the lipid bilayer, then the name of the cell membrane which we very commonly use is called as lipid bilayer. Now, why this lipid bilayer structure or lipid bilayer molecule has come into picture? So that's the question. Where does the life has originated? The life has originated in the water. The molecules, the life, the origin of life is in the water. Now, for the cell to have all the substances, water is the best medium. Why? Because water is a universal solvent. Water is a universal solvent. So the molecule in the cell membrane has to be a molecule which should be water loving. That's why cell membrane has adopted a molecule called as phosphate molecule. Phosphate. A phosphate is a hydrophilic molecule which loves water. So whenever water comes around cell membrane, yes, it can stay near the cell membrane. But this water, although it's a very interesting molecule, it's an interesting medium for the life giving medium, but it is also very dangerous, because water is a universal solvent. Again, the same reason, water being a universal solvent, it provides us all the required and important things. But water being a universal solvent, it can also cross the cell membrane and can dissolve the cell itself. We don't want that to happen. So the cell has applied one more technique, and it has adopted another molecule, which are lipid molecules or lipid chains. These lipid chains, they are attached to these phosphate molecules. So these lipid chains, now they are hydrophobic. They are hydrophobic to water. So in this way, a very interesting molecule has come into picture, a water loving and a water hating. As you can see, the phosphate is a water loving molecule, whereas lipid chains are water hating molecules. So water can come near the cell membrane, but it cannot cross the cell membrane. So if you place many such molecules, you can have an environment which is water loving from outside, but at the same time which is water hating from the inside. So cell membrane looks from the outside, it is water loving, so it gives a very interesting environment that it is water loving molecules and water can stay around the cell membrane. But the moment water tries to cross the cell membrane, no, it is being pushed back, because the lipid layer, the lipid chains, they push the water back. Same thing happens for the interior of the cell membrane, because the inside of the cell is also water. So the same molecule is placed but in a reversed manner inside the cell. So we have a water hating molecules in the interior and a water loving molecules at the exterior. In this way, we have developed a lipid bilayer structure. This is called as a lipid bilayer molecule, where the membrane looks water loving from outside, but it is water hating from inside. And this is one of the very interesting molecule which has come into picture. Let us see the structure whole once again. We have a structure which is water loving from the outside. You can see from both the end the water loving molecules are there, but the interior of the cell membrane is water hating. So in this way, water can stay on the exterior, water can stay on the interior, but the water cannot cross the lipid bilayer directly. And that's how the lipid bilayer molecule or lipid bilayer structure of the cell membrane has come into picture. Just to give the whole idea, this will look something like this. This water loving will be from outside, water loving from the interior, but the membrane itself inside will be water hating, and hence you call it as a lipid bilayer structure. So all the water loving molecules will come near, but they cannot cross the membrane. But the lipid soluble molecules, they can cross the lipid bilayer directly. That's how the things work. So let us give some examples. For example, sodium. When you dissolve common salt in water, it gives you Na plus, that is a sodium ion, and you can have a chlorine ion. So sodium ion and a chlorine ion, they have a charge on it. They are water soluble. So they can come near to the cell membrane, but they cannot cross the cell membrane. Neither sodium, neither chlorine, they cannot cross the cell membrane. But oxygen is one of the very interesting one. Oxygen is lipid soluble molecule. Gases are lipid soluble. So oxygen can cross the lipid bilayer directly. So in this way we can have a very interesting arrangement where the membrane is a very selectively permeable, and also you can call it as a semi-permeable membrane. Selectively permeable, it will select which molecules to be allowed and which molecules not to be allowed. Semi-permeable, when there are water molecules or when there are very small molecules which are lipid soluble, they can cross the lipid bilayer directly. So oxygen can move through the membrane directly because it's lipid soluble, whereas sodium and chlorine being water soluble, they cannot cross the lipid bilayer. So Spatial arrangement has come into picture and the membrane has developed as a whole. Now the question arises, how does the water soluble substances can cross the membrane? For this, the membrane has one more arrangement, and that arrangement is the protein molecules. The membrane has a special type of protein molecules which makes the channels or the windows in the cell membrane. These protein molecules, they form a channel or a pore which causes the molecules to cross the lipid bilayer, which otherwise they cannot. So for sodium, for example, sodium cannot cross, as we have discussed, sodium cannot cross lipid barrier directly. So for sodium, we have made a sodium channel. Now this sodium channel will allow the sodium to move from the cell membrane very easily. So cell membrane can allow sodium ions, but not through the cell membrane, but via sodium channels. So there are channels made up of protein channels. These protein channels, they allow the sodium ions to move. So in this way we can have various types of channels for sodium, chlorine, calcium, magnesium, potassium, and various other ions. These channels are very specific, and this will further add to the property of transport across membrane. So to summarize what we have discussed so far, we have a transport across membrane as one of the thing in picture. The transport across membrane is the movement of molecules and ions across the membrane. These molecules and ions which move across the membrane, they are governed by the properties of the membrane as well as properties of those ions and those molecules. The membrane itself is a lipid bilayer. Lipid bilayer in a sense, it has got a phospholipid molecule. A phospholipid molecule has a phosphoric end which is water loving or hydrophilic, and a lipid chains which are hydrophobic. So a phosphoric molecule is placed on the exterior side and a phospholipid molecule is reversed and placed on the interior side. This forms a sandwich pattern where the either sides are water loving or hydrophilic and the interior of the membrane is hydrophobic. This gives a very special arrangement where water soluble molecules cannot cross the lipid bilayer directly, but water hitting, or you can say the lipid soluble molecules, can cross the lipid bilayer directly. And for the water loving molecules, you can say water soluble substances, we have developed special channels or pores through which the substance can move through them. So this is one of the first part which I want you to understand here, and I hope we have been very clear in this part that membrane as a lipid bilayer governs the movement of the ions and molecules across the membrane. In the next session, we will discuss what are those ions which move across the cell membranes, from where to where, and how this movement of the ions can be classified. So stay tuned for the next session. Thank you.